My first question is why? And my second question is why?
Hey, welcome to our 5th annual 31 Days of Horror here at Ghost in the Magazine. As we do every year, we shift our episode release date from our usual Monday to line up with Halloween, which this year lands on a Thursday. We are currently on week 3, and this week's theme is Imperfect Installments. We discuss some as a group, and others will just get an introduction and a rating. So let's start with a quick introduction of the hosts, and we'll get on with the commentary. I'm Elle.
I'm Mel.
I'm Molly.
I'm Al.
I'm Sadie.
We're on to The Exorcist 3, which I think I can just say fish in the bathtub. This movie was fish in the bathtub, so that's where I'm at with it.
I mean, it's The Exorcist. And it's not that I didn't like the first one. It's just like demonic possession is just so boring these days. Like no one is that's why I like Talk to Me and stuff like that, because the way they did it was like different and inventive. Let's get weird with it. But like I don't care. Like I have no investment in these characters. I don't give a fuck about anything that's happening in this movie. Like at
What
all.
was that? What was that movie we covered where it was like an apocalypse with demonic possession?
Or When
Where
Evil
Evil Lurks.
Lurks. Yeah.
Where Evil
Yeah.
Lurks.
Where Evil.
That was a good demonic possession movie.
Mm-hmm.
This was dog shit.
Well, yeah, there's that, and it's just like The Exorcist, the whole thing was like the first one was iconic. Like you could have just left it there. Why do we keep sequeling the shit out of everything?
Yeah, and this was actually because they had an Exorcist 2, and that was even worse. I got 15 minutes into The Exorcist 2 and I turned it off, and I was like, I'm never watching the rest of that. That was awful. This was written in this screenplay and it was directed by the original author of the Exorcist books. And I was quite a fan of that first book. I talk extensively about how big of a fan I was about the way that he played the existential like lines in it between the different characters. The second book, I could not. I tried so hard. I stopped at page 100 because all that he had talked about all that time was old man shit and fish in the bathtub and his mother-in-law. I don't fucking care. I don't care, old man. Get going. Get going. Do something. And this movie, like the funny thing was, is that first 100 pages was like the first like 5 minutes of this movie. And then it went completely just like, I fell asleep and I woke up and Father Karras was there yelling at him. And that's where I was. I mean, there's a good part of the story I'm missing, let me be honest. But I didn't care to go back and find out what happened.
It's just one of those things where it's like the author wants to be so hands-on that it makes the movie so fucking bad after a while, because it was like that. I mean, not I am not championing Twilight. I'm not. But like whenever Stephanie Meyer had a say in some shit, it was fucking weird or ugly or awful. Like, like bitch, you wrote a bad book. They're trying to help you. Like, but you're making it worse. Like, please shut up. Stop. But
I think people underestimate how much transference of skill is required to convert a book into a screenplay.
Yes.
right.
It just, so many people just think that it's easy, but then you just end up with the absolute worst adaptation of the book. Now, bear in mind, I haven't read any of the Exorcist books. Although I do want to read the first one because
the first one I would recommend.
Up a bit.
This second,
but just hire a screenwriter. It's not that difficult. You've clearly made so much money off of your book in the first place that you can afford to do it. Stop being stupid.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd have to agree with that. Just hire the person who knows how to adapt something for screen. Just because you wrote a book doesn't mean you understand how this would play out. Like,
He was I mean, he was involved quite a bit in the first one, I do think. He worked pretty close with Friedkin, but that was such a like, again, there was so much to the filmmaking that was iconic with that worked. But
I think it's just when you start getting into the sequels of these types of things, when you can tell that like they wrote more books because people asked for more books, but they didn't plan for more books, so they're not really invested in like what the fuck is going on.
That's my least favorite thing ever, I think.
It's like the Colleen Hoover of the haunting world. Like, just stop.
Yeah, a little bit of failure to launch on this one. I don't know. It's kind of like, like your like uncle from the 80s who was like really good at football in high school. And so like in high school, yeah, he could make that pass, but now he's got like a beer belly and Like, watch me do this, and it was really mid, and he like burned the chicken on the grill, like, you know, those kinds of things. Like, it was cool at one time, bro, but like
Now
now
I'm
you're
scared we might have
just
to take you to
milking
the
it.
hospital if you trip. Like, please stop.
Here's
Yeah.
what annoyed me the most because I was just doing a bit of research on this, just Googling it, whatever. And I got a thing going, scariest scene in Exorcist 3. And I was going, what? Which one's this? It was that scene in the nurse's thing, the ghost that just goes after her.
It's considered one of the scariest scenes in cinema.
Oh my God.
That's goofy.
Mhm.
By who?
Nerds.
Okay.
Nerds, film nerds.
Nerds. That's the
My
only.
fucking dreams are scarier than that.
I've seen scarier shit. Have you seen me wake up at 6 a.m. to get ready for work? That's far more terrifying than whatever the fuck that was. I jump scare myself in a mirror.
I gave it 2 chuds, but I think I was being too nice. I'd probably give it a 1.5.
I'm at 1.5.
I would say the same.
And the half is really a nod to the first Exorcist.
Okay, is that all the ratings for that one? As a franchise, Phantasm rides the lines of both weird complimentary and weird derogatory. And because of that, and its frequent use of hilariously fucked looking practical effects, I've been high-key a fan since I first encountered these movies as a kid. As a writer, I can also admire a story that withholds the moving pieces through 5 installments. As I record this, I still haven't bothered to watch Ravager. I don't know what's going on in any of these goddamn movies, and frankly, I don't give a fuck. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I haven't had a good time. And while the movies are fun enough and seem to have some sort of narrative follow-through, there aren't really full arcs developing here. Perhaps that's because it's withholding so much, but each sequel seems to be bashing out the different day part of the old SSDD equation. The tall man has a weird boner for them kids, Reg is a fucking hustler even though he's a goofy ass old ice cream man, and people are gonna die gnarly, and ultimately so is the tall man, and nobody will be any wiser for it. One unique thing I learned or realized during my most recent watch through is that the story is taking place in Eastern Oregon and Idaho. So as a native of Eastern Washington, all I can say is it makes fucking sense. If you're not geographically acquainted with the Pacific Northwest, what most people picture when they think of this corner of the country is mostly what exists along the I-5 corridor and out toward the shore. You know, the best part of our region that's doomed to liquefaction when the big one finally hits. So Eastern Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, that's another world altogether. Once you cross the Cascades, things get fucked up real fast, and all sorts of unsavory situations can take place out here in the scrublands and canyons and ponderosa pine forests. We have cults and fucked up Nazis, and everyone is armed to the teeth. It's a uniquely unhinged atmosphere, and while I still don't know if the tall man is supposed to be an alien or an extra-dimensional baddie like the Mothman or even a demonic incarnation of some religious pantheon, all of that can make sense here, even all of it at once. And with that context, I kind of like all this weird shit even more because, no, I have no idea what's going on, but I can entirely buy that some fuckboy ice cream man could just go around shooting folks and gathering child soldiers to chase a guy with weird balls and mustard blood that he's already killed a couple of times, and nobody would even fucking bat an eye as long as he was mid and white. I didn't realize it when we were finalizing this month's list, but this is actually the movie I remember as Pet Sematary. I don't really remember the original. I remember the story, but this is the movie I remember watching. I remember Edward Furlong and his weird actress mom and the massive fluffy boy Zowie. So for me, there's a real big nostalgia factor to this pick. Not just because I remember the key points of it and scenes and just like the things that stick with you when you watch a movie as a kid and then come back to it as an adult. It's because of the setup, the script, the cinematography. Everything smacks of that 90s era Stephen King adaptation vibe. And my mom was a Stephen King superfan, so I watched a lot of those. The movie itself is solid enough. It's mid. It's alright. It works. There's the typical conflict, the small town setting where everyone knows everyone's business, the traumatized kids fucking up monumentally, building to multiple terrifying life or death conflicts. The main character is Furlong's Jeff, who is the son of the town's new veterinarian. There's a lot referring back to the conditions of the first movie. The weird twist on the dead horse that is a white writer in the 1900s exploiting a native burial ground for narrative purposes. The background of the story is the same as 100 of its time period, but But for as fucking boring and annoying as that is, at least it's a complete narrative, and it makes sense in story and lore. And that's pretty common for a mid-movie in this time frame, but not so common anymore. I've watched plenty of movies with mid or boring premises that did not follow through narratively or stay consistent with the lore. This movie is not the best thing that I've watched, but I can't be mad about it. It was definitely one of the milder things my mom would throw on during a dark, stormy night. It didn't haunt me like The Strays or The Wolfen or the images that burned into my brain from reading the original Pet Sematary in 4th grade and imagining the reanimated dead kid rambling through the woods to return to his parents' home. There's domestic violence, pet death, and some gore, but overall, it's a pretty tame, if not morbid movie that could skew towards a well-adjusted younger audience. But it is still rated R. That said, I definitely watched this in elementary school, and I'm fine. I'm good. I'm completely normal. Halloween 4 is about as mid can get. And when I found out that both the director and head writer were from the great state of Ohio, it all made sense. And I say that as a bitch with Ohio roots. I came into this watch at a disadvantage because while I'm sure that I've watched all of these as a kid, I don't remember them. And the only one I've watched in recent memory is the original. So when I read that this movie was a recovery attempt after the failed Halloween 3 season of The Witch, I just don't know what they were recovering from. All I know is that it made perfect sense to me that John Carpenter had washed his hands of the franchise before this movie was shot. That the original script that he worked on was called Too Cerebral, and the new direction of the film called for Michael to become a human serial killer, not a supernatural monster. I think that is why this series has always kind of confused me. I don't know what the hell I'm looking at on the screen. How can Michael be solely human when motherfucker has more lives than a cat? How is Michael just a serial killer when his evil allegedly infects his niece? What is too cerebral about having consistent lore, or even like having a single or well-marked multiple timelines in a single franchise? I get it. Michael is the stuff of legend. So is Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees. And there are mid or worse installments in each of these franchises. And maybe it's my age or not being able to control my nerdy level, but going down rabbit holes to find why this movie was just so fucking alright was far more entertaining to me than the movie itself. Would I watch it again? Nah. I tried to rewatch it to write this because after watching over 31 movies in recent weeks, everything is kind of unclear in my head. And I found myself doing anything else as I watched it. Cleaning, baking, painting, knitting, napping. It was so unarresting that I was becoming elderly by default. And that's perhaps the most scathing rating I can offer because, it was mid. The next one is VHS Viral. We're going to hop through this. I will say I had trouble with this one, as I do with most VHS movies, because I get motion sickness. Mm-hmm. But I also tend to really like them. This one wasn't terrible. It wasn't my favorite. That's where I'm at with this. How about you guys?
I didn't like it.
I like it, but that's just because I'm a found footage junkie. So like it doesn't bother, like I get being nauseous, all the camera stuff, whatever, but like I like it just for what it is, you know.
I like found footage. This one was a little bit hard to read on screen because of all the movement. There were too many literal dark parts of it that were hard to discern from one thing or the other. But I still want to give it, a 2.5 or a 3 because I really like found footage too.
Yeah, I think
so I'm at like a heavy 2.5.
I gave it a 3.5, but I'd say 3 realistically, just because like nothing beats the original VHS in my head. But
I like the one with the duty man. I don't remember which one that was, but I just remember like Steph and I talking about that guy that was covered in shit underground, and she kept saying the duty man, and I was drinking water while she did that, and I kept like choking and like having to. She did it to me twice. She got me twice.
Maybe they should have put the duty man in Under Paris, and that would have way more convincing.
I mean, the duty man belongs in Under Paris. He would have fixed the movie.
I think I gave it a 1. I don't like found footage. I've discovered that through myself. I'm like, I'm not a fan. VHS has just way too many just like gratuitous boobs, and the wraparound and Viral was not my favorite. The one that like everything was like centered around was not my favorite, especially compared to like the first one in the house. Like this one's kind of just like, eh.
I don't know. I like titties, so I'm not gonna complain when I get to see them.
I like titties. I like titties too, but like,
is there such thing? There's gratuitous dick, but is there such thing as gratuitous titties? Everybody loves titties.
I mean, when it feels rapey, though.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah. I will say that, but it's just
like it's better when the titties are having fun.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true.
That is true.
They don't feel like they're having fun in this.
Those poor titties look sad.
Ew. They're sad and covered in blood and have men smashing them. Like, it's just not.
Yeah, fair enough. Can't really argue with that.
Starting to get really glad that I didn't watch this one.
The VHS movies are solidly like fucked up. Like,
They really
Yeah.
are.
yeah.
I couldn't find it anywhere, so my entire
Oh.
country just went no.
Mm-mm. And I can see
For-
why, honestly.
Yeah.
I can see
Yeah.
why.
I can see why. Yeah.
I'll probably just give this a 2. I really like don't mind VHS, and I do think that this one was significantly harder to watch than some of the other ones, so I lose a lot of the experience from not being able to watch it directly. So I can rate it myself, but I don't know that my rating's useful for other people because I can't stomach it.
Isn't this the one with the magician that felt
Yeah.
like a documentary instead of an actual? Yeah, I watched the first like 3 VHS all back to back and they all blended together. But I'm like, this one it didn't even feel like found footage. It felt like let's make a Chris Angel documentary that and throw it into VHS.
You know what's funny is that reminds me of Tarot a little bit because of the
God,
magician,
God.
but we'll get to that one.
I don't want to talk about it. Oh my God.
So
But no, yeah, as far as found footage goes, this was a little shaky. And then, like, again, I don't know what it is with people in negative 3,000 exposure, but like, I'm fucking blind. Could you please turn it up a little? Like, I can't see what you're doing. But
yes.
yeah, I like found footage. I'll watch any found footage or horror. I don't give a fuck and have a good
Yeah.
time.
Candyman is one of my personal favorite horror franchises. The lore mixes urban legend with a gothic historical backstory, and in most installments, it stays pretty consistent. And Tony Todd is an absolute icon in horror and has given life to the franchise's multifaceted antagonist in a way that makes him incredibly sympathetic despite his terrifying and ultimately murderous presence. He's kind of an anti-hero, and I often find myself rooting for the Candyman, and honestly, rarely did I more than while watching this installment. So the main character in this movie is boring, contradictory, and fucking unlikely. Flashes of conversation and memory try to paint her as like so benign, but it doesn't add up. If she was so selfless, the movie would have immediately been over because she would have been like, oh, dude, you just want me? You're not gonna kill any of my friends or random people if I go with you, and you promise it won't hurt? Bet. I think that the posturing again and again is ultimately what timed out my patience. Either you're a tough bitch willing to take collateral damage to revenge your mom and free yourself from their family curse, or you're a selfless sweetheart willing to offer yourself up as sacrifice to rid the evil of your lineage from the world. It can't be both. And if the rules are literally that obscurity kills, she was kind of in the clear when he fucked his own cult up, which, why would you do that if you're acting in your own self-interest? At that point, she could have just eaten a gun and let it all die with her. The whole story would be over. But as long as she's alive, if we're going by the rule of the lore, he's going to be tied to this world. And right, I get that some people are never say die types, they're always going to try to find a way around it, but I'm not. And based on the constant hand-wringing we see from this character, she's not necessarily. I'm more of the, let's get to the logical crux of this and figure out what my best shot is physically and mentally type. And if my best shot is to take a stroll into a mushroom cloud, I'm lacing up my tennis shoes. And if you're trying to sell me a character that is logical and kind of melancholic and cursed, I mean, we should have a lot in common. So, well, like I said, there are so many admirable things about the Candyman franchise in general and the way that it tells stories, because it sets things up to just really pull at your heartstrings. And it's hard for you not to root for the Candyman because he's been so wronged and everyone around him is so fucking stupid. And it's worked. Despite some of the plotting and character work being tepid in the other two movies, they were still really enjoyable. But this movie, I think the setting and the unfolding lore mechanisms just aren't enough to save the sentient wet cardboard cutout that serves as the primary protagonist. There's also the whole, you have to destroy the good to get to the evil part that I probably should have unpacked, but I just don't have time. And anyway, I don't care how white all of those descendants were. There's only 100-odd years between the alleged birth of Robitaille's kid and Annie Tarrant. Unless the ancestors in between were just repeatedly mating with chuds or some kind of underground creature that doesn't produce a single molecule of melanin, there's no shot both mother and daughter are gonna look like they fell off of a Swedish runway. Come the fuck on.
Yeah.
The next one is Poltergeist 2, which I am just gonna say the whole movie was the worm. The worm was the whole movie. The rest of it was dog shit. It was the tequila worm. That was it. Everything else, dog shit.
Yeah, I didn't watch Poltergeist 2. I think I've only ever seen Poltergeist 1 one time, and like, not for me, bro. Like, I like possessive movies sometimes, but most of the time they just fuck with my head just like a little bit too much, and I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
My first question is why? And my second question is why?
Who asked for this, basically?
Yeah, who asked for this? There's
box
like a
office.
very strong thread of these 90s movies that have like a very exploitative like view of different like belief systems. This one goes back to like on a Indian burial ground kind of crap. I just like I don't have any. It's uncreative. It's stupid. It feels icky. I don't like it. You know?
Yeah. When it doesn't age well like that, and it's just like, come on, like we've done this thing before. It's like the satanic panic stuff. Like, I don't give a
Yeah.
fuck anymore. Like, we know that's not a thing. Shut up.
Yeah.
And I'm definitely with you, Elle. This one is like one of my least favorite. It's like a 0.5 for that reason. It's
Yeah.
just you know. And I think it's like one of the ways that in the 90s like people assuaged their white guilt. They were like, it doesn't matter. Colonization will all be undone by the ghost. Woo! I mean, you know, it's like,
That was
you
the
know,
case, there
reparations.
would be no more white people already. Like, if that was the case, we'd be done. Like, they'd be done already.
Yeah.
But that's not the
So
case.
I'm with you, Elle. I just think it's really culturally insensitive,
Mhm.
and it's real hard to get past that. To be afraid if you're like pissed. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it was terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
This
think
is
I
the
rated this as my worst one.
Yeah, it's
I
terrible.
think
0.5.
I've seen bits and pieces. Is this the one where they like get a shaman and shit?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Gross.
And
I hate
like
that.
Craig T. Nelson's character, like he's one of these typecast characters, I feel like. He was always like the fucking gruff dad that I mean, I guess he believes, which is more than some of the dads in these type of like haunted house stories are. They're just like they disbelieve their family the whole way.
Like, honey, did you take your meds? Like, it's fine.
Yeah, but he's still like he's so his attitude towards the people that are trying to help him is so gross, and it's just like I just don't need another movie like this. I'm good. It was very much just not it for me. Steph was like the tequila worm, the tequila worm, and that was kind of a funny sequence, but it wasn't enough to save the movie. It just wasn't. Thank you for listening to A Ghost in the Magazine. You can find us on the interwebs at ghostinthemagazine.site. You can find us on Instagram at GITM Podcast. You can find me on Instagram at Nocturnical. You can find Mel on Instagram at Mel Shearer. You can find Sadie on Instagram at Sadie_B. You can find Al on Instagram at Maybe Mockingbird. And you can find Molly on Instagram at Molly_McGill.
Okay, bye.